took great care to get the support of the churches, but he wanted to replace everything with Aryan blood myths and the worship of himself. That is certainly true.
But we've run into one of his central points, Mark, which is...
I want to make I just want to say that I think one of the great ways in which, now this, Christopher, you may not like this, but in which Christopher Hitchens is a friend, kind of a friend to the church and to Christians, he forces us to deal with things that are hard things about faith. And as much as I'd rather not have to think about them, I am one that is, in fact, committed to finding the truth, to challenging the things I believe. And I think one of the things Christians need to do is to wrestle much more faithfully and honestly than we sometimes have with some of the sorry parts of our history and the challenging parts of our theology, because I believe that kind of wrestling leads us more to the truth. Now, it may very well not lead us to the exact same truth that we began with, so be it. But I think that the questions that are being asked here and the challenge to Christians to think, to use our brains, to be rational, to examine, to be unafraid of difficult questions, I actually see that as a service, and in that sense, I appreciate the challenge, even though I come to places where I say, I'm not exactly sure how to meet it at this point.
Well, there's a magician's trick in it, though. And the magician's trick is, for example, Christopher Hitchens, when you say, why would God allow Pius XI to die and Pius XII to replace him, when the former is pro-Jew and anti-Hitler and the latter is pro-Hitler and anti-Jew? And it's the magician's trick is that God's not involved in that as you want your reader to believe, Christians believe he is involved in that, and it's not a fair portrait of Pius XII.
No, it's not. It's not harsh enough. I agree, but it is. But you probably don't believe it. But it is believed by Catholics that God picks his vicar of Christ on earth.
Yes, he does, and sometimes.
And it is therefore. Of course, I think it's a nonsensical belief, but if it be true, then at the very eve of the Second World War, he decided to appoint a vicar of Christ who was pro-Hitler. That's a lot to swallow, isn't it? I don't hold God responsible for these things, bear in mind. I'm not insulting him as you do. I'm not saying that he takes responsibility for these things. I don't think there's any such person. I free myself from this incredibly strenuous, impossible belief.
But you can't free yourself from the break. We'll be right back.
You saddle yourself.
We'll be right back with the continuation. Mark Roberts, Christopher Hitchens on the Hugh Hewitt Show. 55 minutes after the hour, Dr. Mark Roberts, Christopher Hitchens, my guest. Mark Roberts, before we go to the third hour, one of the things I found inexplicable about Christopher's book is that he wants readers who are not familiar with Christians to believe that everything is determinism and that God is, in fact, the puppet master running it. And free will is the part that I found so missing from this. Your comment.
Well, two things. One is, yes, that gets undersold, and so it's as if God is responsible for everything, and I don't know that that's fair to the Christian understanding of God. The second thing that I found missing in the book was an understanding that the world is not the way God meant it to be. I mean, if you go to the argument from design and finding a watch on the beach. The watch we find is a broken watch. It doesn't work right. It doesn't keep time the way it was meant to. And so much of what happens in this world, Christians believe in anyway, is not what God intends, both because of human freedom and because the world itself is broken. We also believe that God is in the business of putting the world back together, and in fact that we're a part of that business, and that's part of why we're here on the world. But minus that freedom and minus the understanding of the brokenness of the world, God gets blamed for a lot of things like the so-called acts of God in my insurance contract that I'm not really sure are acts of God so much as acts of nature.
And Christopher Hitchens, I want to be fair to you. That is what you attribute to God as sort of the puppet master.
No. Actually, I'm sorry to have to say, and it is I will say for the first and only time, I think you've completely misrepresented what I write and also what I think. I say it's childish to blame God for things going wrong. It's idiotic. If there was such a person, I'd have more respect for His Majesty than to say he owes me an explanation. You know, if there's a God, why have I got cancer? What a silly question. It would be. I wouldn't have any idea why he would want that. I would just have to accept it. But I mean, I do not go in for this game at all, and I don't know why anybody does.
I know you don't, but I believe that the
picture. I am a bit astounded to find that we don't think that God designed us and the universe after all, or that if he did it with such tremendous, cruel ineptitude. I mean, again, it's not my problem. I don't think this way. As for free will, I think we have it, but I think we have no choice but to have it.
What I was saying is not that you believe it, but that the portrait you put in of Christians is that they believe Christ is, or that God is in fact in charge of everything.
They invite these. I mean, after all, did you not just say to me that if I contemplated the history of the Jews, I would have to see that God was planning everything for them? Well, I say, well, if you say that, then you've just accepted, on behalf of a deity whose mind you appear to know, how, you don't say, an enormous responsibility.
No, you see in history an unfolding of a reconstruction effort that Mark Roberts was referring to, not one driven forward in every detail, but one in which that mystery of free will is allowed to operate. But that's the big theology. We're coming back to hour number 3. Christopher Hitchens and Mark Roberts, the great God debate. Don't go anywhere. To the bigger questions, and yes, there are still more when we return to the great God debate on the Hugh Hewitt Show.